Okay, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm.
Please try if you could share the screen.
Let me check how it's gonna work.
Yeah, we can see it very well.
Okay, so you can see my screen, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I get started. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and this opportunity to share our research. So my name is Sergey Skakun. I'm with the University of Maryland, Department of Geographical Sciences and College of Information Study. And with my collaborators, students, graduate students, postdocs, and collaborators from Ukraine and European Union, I want to share some of the results that we are achieving within the NASA-funded project on identifying and monitoring hotspots of land cover land use change in Ukraine. So what the problem we're trying to solve here? So in the past decades, there were always physical changes in land cover and in land use in Ukraine. And the drivers for that are various environmental, climatic disturbances, obviously policy changes, and most recently political economical disruptions, including the Russian invasion, which actually started in 2014. Obviously, it's a two-way street in the sense that those drivers are prompting changes in land cover and land use, and those are prompting the necessity of improving or adjusting the policy on that. So overarching objective and overarching research questions that we're trying to solve is related to analysis and quantification of the impact of LCLAC, and we're targeting different strides like agriculture, forestry, and urban changes. So in order to do it on regular and quantitative and qualitative basis, we use remote sensing technology, satellite data, and products that are coming from NASA, commercial sector, European Space Agency. So this is done within, NASA has a land cover land use change program, the whole program related to the implementation of those data in geoinformation product in order to identify those changes. And peculiarity of that program, it's not just physical representation of the Earth, but it has a very strong socioeconomic component, how those changes affect in socioeconomic situation, or how the socioeconomic situation, including, as I mentioned before, changes in policies affect those changes. And we're targeting in this project, we're targeting not only Ukraine, though the Ukraine is the pillar of that project, but we're also looking at the neighboring countries, trying to find the similarities and differences in how policies, for example, in European Union change situation in Ukraine, or what are the best practices that we need to take advantage of. So Professor Kusol, during her plenary speech, he outlined very nicely the generic state in Earth observation. I'll just mention some of the same similar data set that she mentioned during her talk. We're using the whole suite of imagery, starting from coarse resolution imagery, where the pixel size is hundreds of meters. We go to moderate and open data like Landsat and Sentinel-2, which provide 10 to 30 meter resolution. But also we have opportunity within NASA to get access to commercial satellite like Planet data and Volview data from Maxar, which would give sometimes some sub-meter resolution. We work not only with classical multispectral data, but also with radar microwave data, like synthetic aperture radar, Sentinel-1, at around 10-20 meter spatial resolution. And also we use nighttime lights with a specific sensor, which acquires data during the night lights, like VIRS at 500 meter resolution. So those data, and along with state-of-the-art image processing techniques we use for different research, like assessing the impact of war in Ukraine on LCLAC in more generic context. We look at the agriculture, and particularly the impact of industrial crops. We look at the crop residue burning in Ukraine and a neighboring country, also Russia, and we're targeting intra-urban land use changes. There are a lot of peculiarities there. It's not just urban sprawl or building new buildings. It's much more complicated. But in this presentation, in 15 minutes, I will not have time to cover absolutely everything. So I will focus on the most pressing topic of of the ongoing war in Ukraine. So the first topic that I want to discuss is detection of artillery craters in the fields, in agricultural fields. We started working on that problem around 2 years ago, and we started with the 2014 data at the time in eastern Ukraine, where Russia would use a lot of artillery rockets, and the peculiarity of that is that a lot of those unreliable artillery. It means that 10, 20, sometimes 30% of those are unexploded ordnance, and obviously they pose a huge safety issues, and those need to be demined. So the project being used before that is just taking those high resolution imagery and manually delineating, and obviously it's not feasible at large scale. So we took advantage of those data and deep learning approaches, and to understand to what extent we can use contemporary satellite data to map the craters in the agricultural fields. So we use, again, and for this we started using WorldView 2, WorldView 3 data, where they have panchromatic around 50 centimeters and multispectral one around 1-2 meters. We manually labeled, obviously for state-of-the-art approaches, you need to have usually a lot of labeled data. So we labeled around 18,000 craters, which would account for almost 400 kilometers squares. And we didn't reinvent the wheel in terms of UNet architecture. We just took the one that Brand et al. They published a Nature paper on tree crown detection in sub-Saharan region. So basically, it was the same architecture applied for a different problem. And the most, so since I'm on the boundary between applied science, mathematics, computer science, and geography, so we're not interested in just benchmarking and evaluating on the existing data set. So we also want to provide statistical significant validation, so we can be sure in robustness in space and time of this approach, and there are peculiarities on validating those. So we are not just we will label those data and we will evaluate on those labeled data. So we want to see the whole population. So obviously it doesn't make sense to validate each crater per se, because those crater sizes are different. So we have to come up with a little bit more sophisticated approach, and we used area frame sampling. What it means that the area frame or the sampling unit is 1 by 1 kilometer grid, and then you stratify by the intensity of craters, and then you in each of those 1 by 1 kilometer sampling unit you would delineate all the craters, and that is the most important. So in such a work, overall accuracy doesn't make any sense, because it's hugely unbalanced, because obviously most of the area is actually without craters. So, but what is interesting is the obviously per class accuracy, so like producer's accuracy and user's accuracy, which in computer vision usually called recall and precision. And also the peculiarity is that you can do this performance evaluation both in terms of area of craters, but also in crater counts. So as you can see from the slides, we are hitting in terms of area around 90-95%, whereas in crater counts we have good recall, but at the same time lower precision. That is happening. Why it's happening is just because we prioritize detection of the craters at the expense of some commission errors. So we want to. This is common topic that we want to even detect some over detection of the craters, but we want to detect as much as possible for obvious safety reasons. Then we can create a heat maps or hotspots of those. So those can be delivered to the people who are doing the mining. So that was done for 2014, but obviously with the invasion in late February, obviously we started collecting a lot of the data, and the intensity and the amount of the craters just was incredible. So within the front line, we're collecting Maxar, but also SkySat data, which are planet data at 50 centimeter resolution. So and we started collecting them, and not only looking at the number of craters, but also on the impact of agriculture. Professor Kusel, in her plenary speech, she talked about that a lot of fields either been abandoned, not harvested. And this is one of the examples of such two fields. So on the left to imagery a sky sat and detection of those craters. As you can see, there is a huge difference in crater size because they're coming from different caliber. They're coming from both sides, but mostly from Russia side. And within our other activities on food security, we detected that those fields were winter cereal crops. So they were nice. They were planted obviously before invasion. They were nice in May, June, but in beginning of July, as you can see, they were shelled. And ultimately, so on the right to imagery, this is Sentinel-2 imagery at 10-meter resolution. So those colors and representation is different wavelengths. And if you want to look at the active fires or burned fields, we have to use shortwave infrared, which is not available mostly on the commercial satellites. So when we talk about shortwave infrared, we're talking about 1.6 microns in the wavelengths. So you can see those with red color, you can see active fires. So, and then those fields being burned. So those fields would never be, in this year, they will be harvested. So those crops will be never accounted for harvested, and obviously there will be loss in agriculture productivity. So obviously this is just visual examples, but we can do it on a large scale, and then we can quantify with statistical approaches. We can quantify how much of those been damaged and see the impact of that. So switching gears for night lights, we're using Weir's night lights, and again we started working before the current year and focused on 2014, and we found that so first of all, it's a high quality data. It's not just light and not light, but it's actually measurements of radiance of lights coming. And it takes a lot of efforts to produce those high quality data to adjust for angular effect, moonlight, and etc. But also a lot of work tries to use this as a proxy for economic activity, whereas they don't dissect the nightlights in terms of urban different fabrics and different land uses. And there are peculiarities on that because, for example, we found that outside official boundary, almost 40% of nightlights that's related to the industrial use being reduced considerably. We find a lot of areas where the railroads in that region in eastern Ukraine, a lot of nightlights outside city boundaries, those are huge industrial complexes or the quarries or mines, either coal and those were affected. And their weight, obviously, in GDP, in gross domestic production, is obviously much different than from simple residential area. We have a paper published in Environmental Research later, so you can look in more details. Now, this is just some examples with very high resolution imagery on the left, and those areas that almost went in the dark, like ore mines, explosive warehouses that used for mining or ore processing plants. And also we even could detect, even though it's coarse resolution with sensitivity, it can detect even railroads, and we can assess the impact on that. And this is a little bit outdated, but this is the image of current year. This is the composite. So this is the average during the March 21 on the left, March 22 on the right. Obviously at that time there were a lot of turning off electricity, so those will be not an easy target for Russians. But this, we just see the impact, and obviously using those night lights, we can also assess how much time certain areas were out of electricity. So that is how you would convert those imagery and data into the something useful. Another topic that we are focusing on occupation of environment. Some of the parts of it you can monitorize, but some of the parts it's very difficult to assess in a monitory, but this just shows the impact of occupation. So what we're talking about here is the Emerald Network site in Ukraine, in Siversky Donetsk region in Lugansk Oblast, which is a very important in terms of preserving habitats. There are a lot of endangered species that there, and what we found just looking at the tree cover as a proxy for the for the biodiversity, that there are huge implications of the on that. So what we mean by that, before 2000, before the those policies were put in place, that region saw experience quite a large deforestation. So the forest has been cut, and obviously that would influence the flora and fauna of the species. So starting from 2000, those policies start to be in place, and that region saw a net gain in tree cover. So the forest started to be reforested, so it was a positive dynamic. Unfortunately, starting from 2013, where the part of the area was occupied by the Russians, that reversed. So in area controlled by Ukrainian government, the positive dynamics continued, whereas the area that occupied by Russia is just became worse. So this is just shows how physical, but also how physical changes are affected by the policy, or not implementing those policies in the occupied areas. And again, obviously, this gives us an idea about how much of this will be damaged, and but also some of this it's very difficult to monetize in that. So just some summary. So we are in the state where Ukraine obviously has a lot of changes, and some of those are of regional, some of them of national, some of them of global importance, especially if we're talking about agricultural. So we're currently working on detecting artillery, and we already within the front line, we're already counting that more than 1.5 million of artillery craters, and probably we will estimate even more in almost 21,000 square kilometers of Donetsk, Lugansk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson Oblast, where the combat operation are happening. So that's definitely frustrating. We are working with some NGOs, try to help and also from one side validate, but also to give those data and help in relief efforts. We are also working to see how different resolutions, including at Sentinel level, we'll be working with Professor Kusul about that, and see how we can use non-frequent, very high resolution data with coarser resolution but more temporal frequencies, so we can detect in a temporal domain better. We also showed the occupation of environment and non-implementing the policy and how those affect. And we also found that within 2012 and 2016, when the war started in eastern Ukraine, almost 50% decrease in total nighttime lights, but they were absolutely heterogeneous in terms of different land uses, whether it's industrial or residential. So that's all that I wanted to share. I think we will have some time for maybe questions, yep.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for your presentation. Are there any questions, please, for the presenter?
Yeah, I know in a virtual environment, it's not always good opportunity. There are not a lot of opportunities to talk, like during the coffee break. So if you would have any questions, just shoot me an email. And yeah, if you have any follow-ups. And yeah, we're usually pretty open for any collaboration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sergey.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.